Throughout the duration of my speech, I would like each and every one of you to consider how you communicate and how you use humor to get your point across. And then at the end of the speech, I would like each of you to share if there's anything that you would like to change about yourself. Well, not yourself, but your communication and humor, and how you might do that. For the purposes of this speech, I have some markers. And they're more than just markers. The red ones are sarcasm, and the blue ones are clarity and kindness. And at the beginning of my speech, my communication is just sarcasm. Mamu Darwish once said, "Sarcasm helps me overcome the harshness of the reality in which we live. Eases the pain of scars and makes people smile." When I came to Elzar, this was my view of sarcasm and irony. But throughout the semester, I have realized that they are not, in fact, valid methods of communication at all times. This semester, I've learned how to communicate in a more candid, straightforward, and kind manner. I have learned that not everyone appreciates sarcasm, and that while there is a time and a place for it, there are many times and places that it is not acceptable. I came to realize this, not in one moment, but through an accumulation of moments, throughout an experience that has come to represent communicating with clarity and precision. The first blow to my sarcastic wit came when Jesus and Pedro first met us at the airport. At that point, we were all very timid. Over time, however, we became more and more comfortable together. Eventually, I reached the point where I felt comfortable making a sarcastic statement. I do not remember what I said, but I do remember that they did not understand it. I attribute this to the lack of a language in common and to my decidedly dry sense of humor. I remember them staring at me as if to say, should we dignify that with a response? And then proceeding to explain to me why what I said did not make sense. Meanwhile, I was oblivious to their good-intentioned explanation, as I realized that my clever quip had gone unappreciated. I may not have realized this at the time, but I believe that, subconsciously, I began to question my unconditional use of sarcasm. The second, mortal blow came on Wednesday. I'm not sure what day of the month, or even what month, but I remember the day all too clearly. My day had been going quite well, and I expected mentor meetings to be more of the same. However, this was not to be. In addition to normal mentor meetings, this was the day that the students were being shown their feedback sheets. I went in, not expecting pluses across the board, but rather quite a few checks, very few deltas, and a few pluses sprinkled here and there for flavor. When Austin gave me the sheet, there was a sense of foreboding in the air. This I attributed to the excitement, because he was going to present me with how well I was doing. I looked down at my sheet, and while the general trend was not negative, my eye fell upon one piece of feedback, and try as I might, I could not tear my gaze from it. The feedback stated that I needed to think about how my words impacted the community, and that my sarcastic quips did not belong in the classroom. Now it doesn't seem like a big deal, but at the time, I was incensed that someone would dare to strike at such a fundamental and essential part of who I was. That they would label the strongest, weight-bearing part of my personality as unsound, as needing to be replaced with a stronger, purer trait. With time, this fiery anger was replaced with a guilt that began to eat at my pillar of sarcasm like hungry termites, and eventually led me to the conclusion that something had to change, and that I could not respond to this criticism with sarcasm, as I had so many times before. I decided that I would have to strive to be more cognizant of what I said, and more aware of the impacts that my words have on others, in order to communicate with clarity, precision, and empathy. In short, I resolved to prop up the sagging roof of my communication with a joist cobbled together from sincerity, thoughtfulness, and clarity. While this set me on the road towards my goal, there were times that I did fall off the bandwagon. The most obvious lapse of conviction occurred during WAFA, and it involved one of the most emotionally resilient people I know. Adelaide Mullen is an exuberant, fun-loving, and relatively sarcastic person. For these reasons, while I was walking on eggshells around everyone else, I was smashing around her. I would voice a quip, and she would fire back quicker than I thought possible. This verbal sparring quickly became a cornerstone of our relationship, and we could always be heard hurling comments back and forth. During WAFA, however, my dedication to this friendly feud got out of hand. When picking groups for a simulation, Adelaide asked if I had gotten a group already. And instead of telling her that I already had a group, I said something along the lines of, "I don't want to be in a real medical emergency." While this was intended as a good-natured prod, it was not interpreted as such. Adelaide took it as an affront to her skill and trustworthiness. This was not at all what I was trying to convey, so I apologized and made amends. But the thought that I could have avoided if I had simply communicated that I was already in a group, clearly and precisely, sat heavily on my thoughts. Since then, my resolve has had no major lapses, and I am dedicated to continuing that streak. I intend to apply what I have learned when I get back home by not alienating people using sarcasm, not making disparaging remarks that could lower morale, and by remaining positive and straightforward whenever possible. I will strive not to need the last word, and thus keep the conversations friendly. I will avoid scathing quips and pointed prods, and thus avoid the animosity of others. I will avoid making any derisive statements or ones that could be construed in a negative light in order to protect the integrity of those to whom the comments would have otherwise been aimed. Instead, I will use my sarcastic wit for lightening the mood, bringing smiles to people's faces, and good-natured joking. The statement, sarcasm, I now see to be, in general, the language of the devil, for which reason I have long since as good as renounced it, by Thomas Carlyle, transmits a strong aversion towards sarcasm, a feeling I do not share. I believe that sarcasm has its uses, falling into a spiral of sarcasm, saying every single quip that enters their mind. At the same time, I do not believe living life in a black and white, literal frame of mind is a good idea. Rather, one must walk the middle path between the two, communicating with clarity and precision, but still with inflection of humor, sarcasm, and irony. In a nutshell, it is as Gordon B. Hinckley once suggested, that as we go through life, we should accentuate the positive, that we should still our voices of insult and sarcasm, that we should more generously compliment and endorse virtue and effort. Thank you.